Sir Vikram Nair.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of the motion standing in the name of the Finance Minister. I also oppose the motion proposed by Mr. Leong Man Wai to the extent that it states free trade agreements like CECA are responsible for the anxieties created for Singaporeans in relation to jobs. I'm actually quite surprised that Mr. Leong maintains this position, despite the clarifications that have been provided in the last sitting about how free trade agreements like CECA work. Now, it is common ground that Singaporeans have anxieties about jobs. And as advisor to metal industries workers' unions, I've seen retrenchments take place, and I've seen how businesses cope with difficulties. Now, the usual cause of retrenchments is business difficulties or restructuring. Now, this has nothing to do with free trade agreements. These are business realities. In the course of COVID-19, many industries have suffered as well. Sectors like retail, F&B and tourism. Even well-known names like Robinsons have folded during this period. Now, the sufferings of all these businesses have nothing to do with free trade agreements. Global businesses are such that business cycles have become much smaller, there's a lot more volatility, and jobs, people may need to change jobs because the world changes. Industries become redundant very quickly. Now, typically in situations where redundancies take place, the reality is that it's usually foreigners who lose their jobs first, as work passes are not renewed. For those Singaporeans who need to be redeployed or reskilled, where industries are unionized, the unions come in to help. So this is how we try to work with Singaporeans with job anxieties. And right now, the job anxieties are only going to get more. Now, for those who retain jobs, especially in this current climate, there are many people who feel pressure working from home as well, because they fear potential redundancies. Maybe the bosses don't know that they're working, so they work longer hours. And I think all of this adds to Singaporeans' anxieties about jobs. But I think as members of this House, we have to be very clear what are the cause of anxieties. Now, what happens if there are situations where foreigners take Singaporeans' jobs? And we've all heard anecdotal evidence of this. The Ministry of Manpower actually has many levers that it does pull in these situations. Currently, companies are required to actually comply with the Fair Consideration Framework, which means that they must give consideration to resident population first before they apply for foreign work passes. And as a lawyer, I've dealt with many companies who've been on the wrong side of this, right, and who have been investigated by MOM and against whom MOM takes actions. So these levers are exercised judiciously. Now, what do free trade agreements have to do with all this? Now, I think it would help, actually, if people understood free trade agreements. And it's clear that Mr. Leong may not even have read the relevant provisions. Now, the primary aim of free trade agreements is the removal of tariffs. Tariffs are taxes imposed on goods being traded. Generally, the higher the tariffs, the less trade takes place as the cost of trading goes up. Reduction of tariffs encourages trade by reducing transaction costs. Now, free trade agreements also usually have provisions to facilitate the transfer of services to flow freely between countries. So consumers and businesses will therefore have choices to purchase goods and services from all over the world, while producers of services can likewise look at more countries for a potential marketplace. Now, related to the aim of improving business between countries, there are also bilateral and multilateral investment agreements. Now, typically, these are a different species of agreements. These agreements usually permit countries to invest in each other, and the host country would provide protections for such investments, such as not to expropriate them. And for those of you who've read about the more tumultuous past, there are many situations where foreign investors go into a country, and because of political turmoil, those investments may get expropriated. So multilateral investment treaties provide that kind of minimum protection. Now, some treaties go further. They have clauses that provide most favored nation status, which means that we will give this country the same provisions it gives to any other trading country. So against this backdrop, CECA is primarily a free trade agreement that allows goods and services to flow freely between India and Singapore. It has some clauses that protect investments, and this includes protections against expropriation in Chapter 6. Now let's come to Chapter 9 of CECA. This is where Mr. Leong, I think, has found the language on free movement of persons. Now, there is language here on the free movement of persons, but what it allows is the free movement of persons for temporary purposes. This is primarily to facilitate people wishing to visit one country or another for business purposes. So I am part of Raja and Tan's South Asia desk, and I have a number of clients from India. So generally, if any of them wish to visit Singapore, they will need a sponsor from Singapore to indicate they are visiting for business purposes when they apply for a visa. And on this basis, they may be granted a visa to visit. Now, the same applies for people who wish to visit for investments. And the same thing applies if Singaporeans wish to visit India. So this facilitates the free movement of people to do business. Does this take away jobs? No. Does this create jobs? Potentially, yes, because more people are coming here to do business. More businesses start up here. More businesses service other parts of the world. Now, Chapter 9 of CECA does not change anything in relation to citizenship, permanent residence, and long-term employment. And this is very express in Clause 9.2. So this means Singapore retains full discretion on who it admits. Right? The drivers for our long-term employment policies are our needs, as Dr. Tan See Leng has explained very clearly in his ministerial statement. Now, if it is felt we do not need that many people in a particular sector, or that Singaporeans can do the jobs, it is already within our power to do this, and CECA does not change this. So what really is Mr. Leong trying to achieve with this motion? CECA is just one out of 26 free trade agreements that we have. Why focus on this one? Is it simply to target Indian nationals? Or worse, people of Indian ethnicity? It is clear that anxieties about jobs relate to structural issues that have nothing to do with CECA. At the same time, CECA potentially helps to create jobs for people by facilitating investments and trade. Now, according to MTI, some 97,000 locals were employed in 2019 by organizations that invested in India. So if people in this House who have the ability and should research and look into things before coming, I think, do their homework, we will probably be in a situation where we have clarity on these issues. Now, I've heard feedback from many people in the Indian community about discomfort they are feeling with the current anti-CECA stance being perpetuated, which is a thinly veiled attack against Indians. Even the leader of the opposition has acknowledged it's a dog whistle in some corners. Many in Singapore's Indian community also get caught up and mistaken in this anti-foreigner torrent. Now, in some ways, I can understand why members of the public may have mistaken beliefs that treaties like CECA are causing foreigners to take their jobs. Essentially, they may be feeling job pressures and job losses, particularly during a pandemic. At the same time, they may see many foreigners, including Indian nationals, having jobs. But these jobs are in different sectors, and these jobs, if the Singaporeans are eligible for them, they should apply for them. And if they're not given fair consideration, they can report to the MOM, and MOM will take action against the employers. So I think it's important for us to help solve misunderstandings and make it clear that, even though there are foreigners who have jobs, they're not getting it by virtue of free trade agreements like CECA. Now, Mr. Leong also talked about the white paper and said that this was a paper that proposed allowing foreigners to come into Singapore. Now, I was actually in this House when the white paper was being debated. And again, if you read the white paper, it says very expressly, we cannot allow in an unlimited number of foreign workers. We do not want to be overwhelmed by more foreign workers than we can absorb, or to expand our total population beyond what our island is able to accommodate. So if you look at the white paper properly, it is really a very balanced paper that looks at Singapore's long-term needs and what foreigners and how many foreigners we can accommodate within that framework. Now, against this backdrop, I think to me it is very clear that CECA and free trade agreements really have nothing to do with the anxieties Singaporeans face about jobs. There are very real anxieties Singaporeans face, and the way to address those is to make sure we continue to create new jobs and be an attractive place for investments to come in. Now, I'm also one of those who agrees that we should have protection for Singaporeans, and as one of those who also spoke in favor of the anti-discrimination laws, which I'm glad are coming into force. So this will give an additional lever. So currently, MOM already has the power to take away work passes for foreign workers, for employers who engage in discriminatory practices. What a potential anti-discrimination law would do is also give the aggrieved individual a personal right, a personal remedy. So to me, this is one more additional measure to prevent employers exercising discrimination. Now, let me, in closing, also address the amendment put forward by the Leader of the Opposition, Mr. Pritam Singh. I think I'm glad that the Workers' Party does seem to have a lot of common ground with us. I think they've stated expressly that they agree free trade agreements are important for Singapore's future. And he's also acknowledged that CICA has been used as a dog whistle in some corners for racist behavior. But I will have to stop short of supporting the amendments and would actually be objecting to them. Now, the main reason I'm objecting to the amendments is, firstly, I think they change the substance of the motion. This motion is a very clear one, the two motions before this House. Mr. Leong's motion claims that Singaporeans' job anxieties are caused by free trade agreements like CICA. The minister's motion is quite different. It focuses on the measures we need to take to deal with Singaporeans' anxieties and denounces the link to CICA and free trade agreements. Now, I think what Mr. Singh is really trying to do is to include one of his pet topics, I think, a request for more information into this debate, which is really quite different from what the core of this debate is. The First Amendment, of course, where I think is changing the word supports government action to calls for stronger government action, also has an insinuation that the government is not doing enough. Now, I personally don't think this is fair to the hard work done by the people in the Ministry of Manpower, who I know are bending over backwards to enforce and take measures to support the local employment. So I do not agree with that amendment. The second amendment, to proactively release information on jobs and employment prospects of Singaporeans, there is actually a great deal of information out there already. There's quarterly labor market data, advanced market data coming out with breakdowns of Singaporeans and foreigners employed. So, I think an insinuation that there isn't adequate information out there is something I cannot support. In relation to free trade agreements, there is the agreements themselves out there in the public domain, which anyone can read, but I think very few do, except perhaps a few people like us lawyers. But that information is out there. There's information on the MTI website that simplifies the benefits of free trade agreement for people. And of course, if more information is needed, if a debate is needed on the costs and benefits, we can always have motions in Parliament. So in my view, I don't think the amendment is necessary because it insinuates that there isn't enough information out there and we can't make sensible decisions with the available information. So, Mr. Speaker, for that reason, I will not be supporting the amendment. Thank you.